I'm here with Nick Barrett, the medievalist from England, who many of us have seen in plenty of places on television and at various family history shows. Hi, Nick.
Hello, lovely to see you.
How have you found the medieval world or family history world in the UK in the last 2 years of COVID?
Well, it's been really challenging, hasn't it? Archives have been closed. Incredible rigour about what can and cannot be produced and when and how frequently. I'm concerned, I guess, that some of the COVID lockdown restrictions haven't yet eased, even though we're largely out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to challenge the way we research in the future. Back in the day, pre-COVID, you could go in, you can request your documents in advance, great, but you could also order on the day. Now, as we know, if you're researching, particularly in the medieval period, you might find one thing that leads to another clue, and then you need to go straight into that, particularly some of the index books for earlier records. You can't do that as well these days, so I'm really concerned that those practices haven't yet eased, and it's being used as an excuse to reduce services. So that might be a very controversial view, but it's one that I've raised before, way back from 2008 when we saw mass closure of libraries and archives, or at least the reduction of services. We seem to be going backwards again, which isn't great.
And there's no way we can digitise it all, there's just too much.
Well, the problem is it's not structured data, so it isn't standard form used year after year where you can extract and then recreate digitally. It is very much freeform, and the handwriting's challenging. Now, the thing about that is that with all the various AI, I want to do this really cool project where you can take transcripts of key documents, and because they're fairly formulaic, you could use that to teach the machines to read. And when we've tried it, incredible levels of accuracy when we've done spot checks. Now, if you could do that, you could run AI over digital content. There's a lot out there. The Anglo-American Legal Tradition website has got a huge amount of medieval records, but it's unindexed, and the images aren't in a form that you can really manipulate and look at easily. So it's got challenges, but what if you could now use some of this AI technology to automate that writing and create really good quality transcripts? That would open up so many records, and maybe could lead to some of the digitisation records of manorial material, fantastic stuff, court records.
Manorial material, especially Wakefield, has been published.
Yeah, this is it, with pockets, absolutely.
Yeah.
So in the areas of the country where they have done some really good transcription of digital projects, you're beginning to get access, but for most of the country, most of the time, you're going to have to go back to where the archives hold the material, and that's a trick, which if you live in the States or Australia, New Zealand, it's not really economically viable.
No.
And yeah, you can hire an independent researcher, but it's not the same. You get that knowledge of how a community worked by immersing yourselves in the way the records were written, spotting the familiar names. You can say, I'm looking for this name, and someone might then literally follow that instruction. But if you know what you're looking for and see the clues, you might spot something else that leads you to the right person. You can't do that if you're struggling. So I do think we need to make sure more content is digitally available, because it is name rich.
Yes.
It's just not structured, which makes it commercially unlikely to be produced.
Well, there are a number of things like in Scotland, people are digitising the Kirk Session records as virtual volumes, and you just have to go through it, but at least it's there online and you can do it from home in your pyjamas.
Well, Essex did that. They were the first to digitise parish registers for themselves, by themselves. And whilst they couldn't provide that detailed index, people, in their thousands were coming in and paying money to get access to the content. So it was a really interesting experiment in controlling the digital content and then creating a market so people would then come and look at the other stuff. There wasn't that barrier of a mediation website in the way.
Yeah.
I think they are now shifting their position because, times are tough. The reasons that we just talked about.
I mean, archives could make a good case for doing it in that A, it protects the document if it's digitised, and B, once it's up, they don't need as many staff. I know that's controversial, but their local councils probably care about the staffing levels.
They do, and I think that's why we're seeing volumes of staff reducing, because the argument goes, well, all the really good stuff's online already, and of course it isn't. We know it isn't in the community, but it's a lazy argument. So we need to find new ways to keep advice and access open, volunteering, and in the UK certainly we've seen a number of family history societies move in with, co-locate, provide services for the archives themselves. Hampshire have done it, Gloucester have done it. Some really great examples where they're now the frontline advisory service.
Right.
They get access for their collections, their space, value add, and people come in for both that and access to the records. So it can work. But yeah, I think it is a bit of a slippery slope to everything's digital, therefore we close the archives. And some have really reduced to maybe 1 or 2 days a week on that same basis.
I was talking to Elsa Churchill from the Society of Genealogists about the changes, and one of the things we mentioned was the coming back to in-person family history conferences and things, and she was saying that the cost of the venues is now prohibitive in some cases. So they tend to just be smaller groups that are doing that. Is that your observation too?
Yeah, it is. And having done a few, the footfall is tiny. Now I know we are coming out of the pandemic. We're trying to get people interested in a wide range of activities and encourage them back. But you could argue that trend has been going for the last 5 or 6 years, regardless of the pandemic. So leaving RootsTech aside, in the UK, I think it's a really challenging space to make money out of doing these shows, and they're very heavily reliant on subscriptions, so that the sponsorship money subsidises the actual experience. Now, again, I can't help but think going to places and meeting people and talking there's so much value you get out of that experience.
Oh yeah, it's not the same just looking at somebody on a Zoom screen.
But even when you're online, a lot of the virtual exhibitors don't get the footfall. So it's sort of the worst of both worlds in some of these cases. Societies can't afford to go. Venue costs are going high. Fuel costs, so the energy price is going higher. And they're just closing. You get a few people turning up, and therefore I think we'll see a further contraction of the on-site space. Where that leaves the future of smaller societies who sell content via these, well, maybe we need to look at how family history societies are structured, how they work together, how they can get that best of an online presence to bring overseas members in with subscription services and access to advice, with maybe a few smaller face-to-face events that may be done on a regional basis rather than just So maybe that's the way forward. Forget the big shows. Maybe combining AGMs or meetings where you have groups coming together and working well. The model that works there is University of the Third Age. The Youth EA groups often combine a whole bunch of regional groups together, hire a big venue, and then you've got an audience of 300 or 400 people for a much more cost-effective way of doing it. So maybe that's something societies have to think about.
Yes, I mean, in a way, they've done that in Australia for years. They've had a New South Wales and ACT Association of Federation of Family History Societies conference. So you get different societies take turns in hosting it. And I hosted the last one before COVID. But you get people from all the groups, and they have their tables selling their goods or advising people about their areas and stuff like that. And we've been doing that for quite a long time.
That seems to make sense. I mean,
but we are seeing that we will have to have hybrid forever, because there are a lot of people who weren't physically mobile enough to go to those things, and they love it when it's online. Other people, they could watch it online, but they prefer to go and actually see their friends again.
That sociability is such an important part because it boosts well-being and mental health, and that's why a lot of people joined up to societies in the first place, isn't it? So how do we capture that without losing that opportunity for people who maybe can't come to them and want to still understand how to do things, the education element of it? It's a tricky balance, and I think you're right, the hybrid approach works well. But there's something about looking at 10, 20, 30 years, what sort of societies are we going to be running? Where will people come from? Looking around here at RootsTech, it's a very younger audience coming through the door.
We're not seeing that in Australia. We're seeing everybody getting older and deciding they've been volunteering for too long, and societies are having difficulty getting volunteers and getting new members, particularly young members, possibly because they all think it's all online.
Well, this might be the problem, and that's where they are emerging. But if you look at influencers and some of the folk who are really active on social media, they've got their communities, they're sharing it. It's as much about storytelling. I still believe that using some of the technology we've seen here today, you can build a compelling, almost bespoke view of the past if you harness the technology with our stories. It's about story. I'm a historian, I would say that, wouldn't I? And that gets people captivated. The imagination is infused. I'll share a quick story, if I may, about my daughter who was doing a school project, and it was all about the Second World War. So she went to my mum and said, "Oh, you know, what was life like during the war?" My mum was born in '38, but she told a story about during the Blitz, they had to, you know, under the cover of darkness, run the air raid shelter they built in their backyard, and just how terrifying it was. The cold night air, the sound of sirens, bombs going off, the fear that that might be the last moment of your life. And, you know, when you're 4 or 5, 5 or 6, you know, the night time's a scary time anyway, so that was terrifying. But then going into the shelter, which had a few people coming in as well from outside, it was cold, it was dank, they had some food and provisions, blankets, but, you know, it was very visceral. It was a very visceral recounting of the tale. So my daughter was inspired by this, and not only built a model of one of the shelters, but populated with all the things she'd heard and wrote about these sounds and experiences. And so she was hooked. And having done the project, where she got accommodation from, we then went to where my mother was eventually evacuated. She wanted to go around and see the places where Granny had been to school, Granny grew up. So she was fascinated, she was hooked on the experiential side. So storytelling, we start with ourselves, we start with our memories, we bring those memories to life in different ways. You know, she's now using technology to create her own storyboards. Maybe she follows in my footsteps, I don't know, whatever. You know, bit of a thing there. But yeah, and it's a very imaginative way of telling the story of the past. We come from a position where the research was challenging because very little was online when we started.
Yes.
We had to go in person. We could communicate it more broadly. It was done.
You wrote a letter. You sent it off. You waited months for an answer.
Now you found something. It's instantly in front of millions of people via all the platforms that we see, and therefore we need to be in those spaces as well. That's how we capture those audiences. You know, we need the next generation of TikTok influencers. We need to go where the crowds are. And not only I think that will show a different community, it might show a way forward for some of our societies. Volunteering is an interesting one, and yeah, there is a constitutional need for a committee of certain folk. But again, as we've seen during the pandemic, with the famous Jackie Weaver clip, you may not know about this, where she came in to run a parish council meeting, and she did it via Zoom, and it's a viral social media clip where the local council is saying, "Jackie Weaver, you've got no authority here," and she just closed them down. But it was an interesting story because there was a group of people who were coming in to provide the constitutional requirements of a committee without necessarily being local. So maybe there's something around people who genuinely love running committees who can help support societies. I don't know, just a thought, but we've started to see that beginning to emerge over here.
And what's life been like for Nick Barrett lately? What have you been doing?
Oh, do you know what? It's just been a really busy few years. I joined the Open University back in 2019, pretty much the same time they did RootsTech in London, so that was great fun. But during the pandemic, we had to move all of our operations off-site, and it was a real challenge. So I spent the last 3 or 4 years getting to know the OU, running a hybrid operation, and now looking at a whole transformation of the way we do our business. So quite intense. So very, very busy. Normally in a job, I shouldn't be saying this, I find plenty of time to do stuff around the edges. Not this job. But there's something about the OU that you just fall a bit in love with. It's values-led, it helps people, it opens up education to everybody. I've just got a brilliant job because not only do I help create the learning experiences through my unit, we run the library and archive, so all the rich heritage that's in my area. We run the BBC partnership, so Blue Planet 2, Green Planet, those are things that we've helped produce. And then we also run the Open Learn platform, which has over 100 million learners accessing higher education content for free. We give it away to help people learn. So in terms of a job, it's been great fun. A few outside interests. I still teach a bit in Dundee. Just seems to be busy. We're running to stand still at the moment. Hence, it's lovely to be here at RootsTech. It's a holiday.
So, if you could have a dream of something happening in the next 12 months, whether it be with records or with your job or with the industry, what would it be?
That's a great question. If nothing's off limits, I would love to see some of the technology that we've seen here today, particularly the AI-driven automation around storytelling, but also creating multimedia moving content, harnessed with some of the immersive kits, virtual reality, extended reality, so that you could travel in time and interact with your ancestors. Now that might sound like a pipe dream, but all the technology is there. Not just the colorization and the way that you can manipulate fixed static content to move and react, but also the digital clips we're creating. The fact that you can take someone's voice and recreate the sound of that voice with a new script. We've done it in film and TV.
Yeah.
That for me is time travel. Imagine a world where you can get your photos and multimedia and put on your immersive headset and have this automated, realistic world generated from that content. So it's authentic and sensitive to the time period, and then you can interact using Electro-style technology to pose questions and answers with your ancestors. It's not real, but can you imagine that? That would be amazing. And it's there. Maybe not 12 months, maybe it's 2 or 3 years, but all the technology is there, and it's about who brings it together first. Now, there's ethical issues there, but I'd certainly have a go with it.
Yeah, I know. Whether you could actually say to your great-great-great-uncle, did you really not leave a will, or did somebody steal it and hide it so that they got a share of your money?
Yeah, well, we've explored, there's OpenAI have created ChatGPT, it's in the news everywhere, about how it's going to destroy education because students just put in prompts and they get the answers written. Possibly, but they also need the skills, and many schools are saying, use it in the way that people now use spell checkers, calculators, so it's going to become mainstream. Yeah. But you quickly learn that whatever's out there, it will suck in and it's not all accurate.
No.
So that's the challenge. You need to create.
I've heard that some of the ChatGPT stuff, it's learnt stuff that's incorrect. Yeah. You try and tell it, no, you've got it wrong, and they say, rubbish, I'm right.
So imagine putting that across all of our connected family trees, knowing how much rubbish there is out there. Yeah. You're going to get a lot of stuff back. Now, wouldn't it be fun to at least ask the question? I don't think you're going to get a meaningful answer, but that sense of interactivity, it could be a really incredible tool for well-being and mental health, actually. People maybe going through trauma or grief or loss, having memories that you could still reflect and go back to. Like I said, ethical issues there, really strong ethical issues. Leaving aside the historical wisdom of creating virtual worlds that aren't real, but people might see as being real, in the way that many people thought the Tudors in the UK was a documentary. Right, okay. It was fictional, and they fictionalised real events, but people now go, oh yeah, that happened because I saw it on telly. Yeah. So it's a minefield, but just imagine what we could do. I'd give it a go. I know I'd ask questions of a few folk in my family tree.
Yeah, there's a few. I'd love to ask a lot of them, why did you choose to leave England and go to Australia?
Yeah.
That was one of the early things that I wanted to learn about.
Yeah.
And I discovered that there is no simple answer in one case. You have to look so much. That is the local and social history.
Yeah.
And discover. And it's not all, they were poor. It wasn't all because they were poor. Sometimes they wanted to get away from the class system. Yeah. Sometimes it was because there was famines or droughts or, But it's fascinating, all the different push factors out.
So taking that example with ChatGPT, for example, what if you had a library of all of the research articles about that area and some of the wider push-pull factors that were there, and you use that? What was the most likely reason that? Yeah. So you're not going to get a definitive, but you're going to get a series of scenarios that may get you closer to something that feels right. Now, that's not replicating that piece of evidence but in most cases, are we going to get that? But it gives you that historical research tool that brings all of this stuff in one place and then presents it in a way that's accessible, reads well. Yeah, you have to question the accuracy, but that might then spark, if that's the case, I can now look at those records. You can ask it, based on what you provided, where should I go for more information? And it will tell you. So I see it as a research tool as much as anything else.
Yeah, that would be great. And one final question. Does your family just keep rolling your eyes when you start finding something new that you enjoy about medieval history, or do they share your love of it?
I've given up talking to them about it. They laugh at me, to be quite frank. They go, well,
If they don't get
yeah, Dad's doing more research. But it's really interesting. They all seem to be following in family footsteps and doing like their history. So maybe it's rubbed off on them after all.
Well, thank you very much for your time and your comments, and look forward to more of your talks.
Absolute pleasure talking to you. Take
Okay,
care. Thank
bye.
you. Bye.